All right, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing with our tafsir. Yesterday, we didn't really finish everything, but I guess we just went past time, and I thought it would be a good idea to continue and also revise some of the things that we were talking about. So let's see. Yesterday, we talked about يا بني آدم لا يفتننكم الشيطان كما أخرج أبويكم من الجنة ينزع عنهما لباسهما ليريهما سوآتهما. And we talked about the word fatana, and we said the key three meanings of the word fatana is one, to expose, two, to put on fire in order to sift the gold from the different pebbles or the different earth substances and the other minerals, and in order to get pure gold. And the other meaning is to sway. So those are the three main meanings. And we said, depending on the context, is basically what we're going to understand. And we said the ayah could have said لا يفتنكم, but it said لا يفتننكم. And we said the shadda is to give us an indication that shaitan may use a gradual process or a gradual way in order to sway us away from haqq, in order to delude truth, and it certainly by deluding us and by swaying, leading us astray, we may then get exposed. And part of those methods that shaitan will use is to expose us on batil, to expose us on the different things that are batil, whether we're speaking about in actions, words, societies, whatever it is, or even ideologies. And certainly a Muslim is supposed to be aware of their deen and supposed to be isolating themselves from all those fitan. Keep that one in mind, because keeping the story of Prophet Adam alayhi salam in mind, when certainly Iblis said, well, أَوَلَا أَدُلُّكَ عَلَى شَجَرَةِ الْخُلْدِ. Does Prophet Adam alayhi salam, did he necessarily know about the tree? Well, he knows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically told him not to eat from it, but he was exposing it. He was indicating, he was trying to market it as if it was the tree of happiness, the tree of giving him privileges, prosperity, power, and the list goes on and on. And certainly the Prophet Adam alayhi salam fell for that marketing, which is really important for us to keep in mind, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would forbid something, whether in something that we may eat or a behavior or what we're seeing, what we're looking at, etc., all of these different things, that is in order to serve something that serves us. It is to serve our interest. And certainly the Prophet ﷺ was the key figure that was helping us understand those. Consider them as traffic signs in order to head towards as-sirat al-mustaqim. So that was a little bit about يفتنكم or يفتننكم ينزع عنهما لباسهما. And certainly the first thing that shaitan basically aimed at was really in order to ليبدي لهما من سوآتهما. He basically wanted them, or at least he wanted to, the key thing that he wanted to do was in order to remove basically the modesty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically put on them. All right. The other thing that we commented on was this one, ليريهما ليريهما من سوآتهما. We also talked about this piece of it. Where's that one? Where's that one at? Hold on. قال اهبطوا بعضكم لبعض عدو. And يا بني, okay, here we go. ينزع عنهما لباسهما ليريهما سوآتهما. This is where we're at. And of course, certainly, we also talked about إنه يراكم هو قبيله. He and his tribes or his followers would see you. They're capable of seeing you. And then we went in some details of what is al-qarin. So al-qarin is basically the jinn or the shaitan that follows each and every single one of us. And then we went in details. Can we actually see al-qarin? Can we see al-jinn? Is there a way? And we summarized that, and we said, well, although it is haram to seek any form of communication or seek any form of seeing or in any form of perhaps maybe dealing with shaitan or jinn, regardless of whether it is for a good reason or whether for a bad reason, it is basically haram to deal with the shayateen, to deal with the jinn, period. Keep that one in mind. It is haram to deal with them, period. I do get some especially the younger generation. I guess perhaps maybe curiosity would take them, and certainly the foundations of understanding the deen is not the same as it used to be. So you would see a lot of the younger generation actually get into that gravity of fitna, and they would get into, I guess, that delusion in trying to make them stay connected with different ways of what that doesn't necessarily require any form of effort. So they would seek in different ways of perhaps maybe if I were to know the future, and certainly different methods of dealing with shayateen and dealing with jinn. Just you probably think that that's more of a traditional countries and relating with probably African countries and voodoo, or Indian countries and relating with jinn, but believe it or not, it is actually a lot more common even in Western European countries than you think. And especially with all this Kabbalah and all this Satanism and all of that is actually becoming a lot more prevalent, unfortunately. And the main reason is because people lost the limits and the borders of their deen. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to basically give that, that teachings, the directions to help them basically understand how to relate all of this. Okay, من حيث لا ترونهم, and certainly we said although the ruling is that you cannot deal with them, there are three different opinions in regards to are we capable of seeing the shayateen or not. The first opinion said this is impossible for you to see a jinn or see a shaitan, period. And then they based it on this ayah, min haythu la tarawnahum. You cannot see them, but they can see you. And they basically took this statement as an absolute statement, and therefore there's no exception to it. So that was the first opinion. Second opinion is that no, it is possible that someone may see al-jinn or shayateen if we're talking about in perhaps maybe the Prophet ﷺ, first of all, he had seen al-jinn or seen a shayateen, but is it possible for other people as well if somebody were to do magic or to do something of that sort? So I said the second opinion between scholars is that yes, you are capable of seeing jinn or shayateen. That was the second opinion. And certainly the evidence that they had used is really the same thing as this. That evidence is basically considering reading this one. And the evidence that they use is really the same one. من حيث لا ترونهم. They said, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said من حيث لا ترونهم as a general statement and not an absolute statement. So they considered it general and not absolute. In other words, there are exceptional cases, whether the person had probably done some sorcery, magic, or probably exceptional cases where, of course, that's where they also had other evidences. Let's look into the other evidences that they had used. And we went to this page. We went to this page because it relates to some of the evidences that the scholars had basically talked about al-qareen. So when we're talking about al-qareen, we needed to derive the rulings or derive basically the information to help us know whether it is possible to see the jinn or shayateen or not. So number one is that we talked about this hadith, ما منكم من أحد إلا وقد وكل به قرينه من الجن. Every single person basically has a jinn that is pretty much like a responsible over them. They're basically connected to them. And they said, even you, O Prophet of Allah. And he said, even me, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, either the hadith goes, إلا أن الله أعانني عليه فأسلم, or فأسلم. فأسلم meaning that he had become Muslim. فأسلم or فأسلم meaning that I would be basically protected and secure from any type of whether we're talking about driving me to the wrong or whether we're speaking about giving me protection basically. So he became Muslim. فلا يأمرني إلا بخير, and therefore he would only order me for what is good. And certainly the Prophet ﷺ asked us to make this dua. And just like in Surah Al-Mu'minun right there, and the ayah, وَقُلْ رَبِّ أَعُوذُ بِكَ مِنْ هَمَزَاتِ الشَّيَاطِينِ وَأَعُوذُ بِكَ رَبِّ أَن يَحْضُرُونَ, and say, "Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from the influence or even the whispers of a shayateen, and I seek refuge in you when they would be present." And we also talked about this hadith, even though not necessarily authentic. And we basically went into the different hadith that gave us alternatives to a sahih alternative to that hadith, even though it's not necessarily an authentic. Right there, إن الشيطان واضع خطمه على قلب ابن آدم. That a shaitan basically puts his nose or his trunk on the heart of the son of Adam. And if they remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would basically quiet. And if the person who would quiet, that is shaitan. And وإن نسي التقم قلبه. So, but if the person would basically forget the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their hearts would take it or grab onto basically shaitan. And that's al-waswas al-khannas. And we said, although this hadith is not necessarily sahih, we do have a hadith sahih in al-Bukhari, and I believe there's even a sahih one in Sahih Muslim that is really similar to it, but this one is basically in Sahih al-Bukhari. So we did talk about that one. The other thing, of course, in regards to such evidence is that we're looking at the other hadith, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or let me see, let me look at this one. Wanted to get to the most important hadith in regards to this one. And hold on, let me see if I can actually. Okay, this one. Okay, this is one of those ahadith. إن عفريتا من الجن. You could see this is a hadith in al-Bukhari. تفلت البارحة ليقطع علي صلاتي. That is a hadith. فأمكنني الله منه فأخذته فأردت أن أربطه على سارية من سوار المسجد حتى تنظروا إليه كلكم. فذكرت دعوة أخي سليمان: رب هب لي ملكا لا ينبغي لأحد من بعدي فرددته خاسئة. Okay, so what is this hadith really talking about? So that one of the ifrit, what is al-ifrit? Al-ifrit is basically an evil jinn. Ifrit is an evil jinn or a jinn that is also one that is in high power. Let's say it that way. من الجن, from the jinn. تفلت البارحة. تفلت meaning they basically went off board yesterday. That is the Prophet ﷺ basically saying. And what he wanted to do was to disconnect the Prophet ﷺ from his salah. In other words, wanted him to get pacified from focusing on his salah. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, فَأَمْكَنَنِي اللَّهُ مِنْهُ. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically overpowered me or empowered me over him. And فَأَرَدْتُ أَنْ أَرْبُطَهُ عَلَى سَارِيَةٍ مِنْ سَوَارِ الْمَسْجِدِ. I was about to tie him up on one of the pillars of the masjid so you could all see him. And then I remembered the dua that Prophet Sulaiman عليه السلام had made. رَبِّ هَبْ لِي مُلْكًا لَا يَنْبَغِي لِأَحَدٍ مِّن بَعْدِي. Ya Allah, give me an authority, give me a power that would basically be given only to me and to no one else but me. And he said, فَرَدَدْتُهُ خَاسِئًا. And then he was basically returned in loss. He did not manage to basically to pacify or even to get the Prophet ﷺ's focus away from Salah. Now, here's the other hadith. You could see that this basically is a hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari. Okay, Let's look at this one. So the first hadith that, well, the previous hadith, the hadith that we had just done, so the Prophet ﷺ definitely had said that he had seen the jinn, that he was about to tie him in the pillar of the masjid. So did the Prophet ﷺ see him? So the first opinion between scholars, they basically said that that is exclusive to the Prophet ﷺ, and that is not something that we can go through or that can happen to us. In other words, this is khas and exclusive to the Prophet ﷺ and no one else, period. The second opinion basically said, well, no, it's not khas because we've got an evidence for it. What is your evidence? They said, well, we've got a story that the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Huraira, basically said the following. He said, the Prophet ﷺ, وَكَلَنِي رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم بِحِفْظِ زَكَاةِ رَمَضَانَ فأتاني آت فجعل يحثو من الطعام فأخذته وقلت والله لأرفعنك إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إني محتاج وعلي عيال ولي حاجة شديدة قال فخليت عنه فأصبحت فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يا أبا هريرة ما فعل أسيرك البارحة قال قلت يا رسول الله شكى حاجة شديدة وعيالا فرحمته فخليت سبيله قال أما إنه قد كذبك وسيعود فعرفت أنه سيعود لقول رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إنه سيعود فرصدته فجاء يحثو من الطعام فأخذته فقلت لأرفعنك إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال دعني فإني محتاج وعلي عيال لا أعود فرحمته فخليت سبيله فأصبحت فقال لي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يا أبا هريرة ما فعل أسيرك قلت يا رسول الله شكى حاجة شديدة وعيال فرحمته فخليت سبيله قال أما إنه قد كذبك وسيعود فرصدته الثالثة فجاء يحث الطعام فأخذته فقلت لأرفعنك إلى رسول الله وهذا آخر 3 مرات أنك تزعم لا تعود ثم تعود قال دعني أعلمك كلمات ينفعك الله بها قلت ما هو؟ قال إذا أويت إلى فراشك فاقرأ آية الكرسي الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم حتى تختم الآية فإنك لا يزال عليك من الله حافظا ولا يقربنك شيطان حتى تصبح فخليت سبيله فأصبحت فقال لي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ما فعل أسيرك البارحة قلت يا رسول الله زعم أنه يعلمني كلمات ينفعني الله بها فخليت سبيله قال ما هي قال أو بالأحرى قلت قال لي إذا أويت إلى فراشك فاقرأ آية الكرسي من أولها حتى تختم الآية وقال لي لا يزال عليك من الله حافظ ولا يقربنك شيطان حتى تصبح وكان أحرص شيء على الخير فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وكانوا أحرص شيء على الخير فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أما إنه قد صدقك وهو كذب تعلم من تخاطب منذ 3 ليال يا أبا هريرة قال لا قال ذاك شيطان Okay, what is the story? So Abu Huraira was assigned on a mission. What is that mission? That mission was to basically oversee the zakah and the distribution, who's bringing in zakah and who's basically qualified to take zakah. And basically, this is how much, with a portion that you get and all of that. That was Abu Huraira's job. So a man comes in and he basically starts يحثو من الطعام. يحثو من الطعام, it's like eating in a way that is with full gluttony. He was eating and just, filling his mouth up and filling his plates and everything with all full gluttony. And then Abu Huraira said, I'm going to complain to the Prophet ﷺ about you. So the guy said, I'm actually in very much need and I have children that are in need and I'm so poor. So Abu Huraira, he basically said, well, I let him go. And then the second day, the Prophet ﷺ said, oh, Abu Huraira, what happened to your hostage yesterday? And the Prophet said, or he said, oh, Prophet of Allah, he really complained about being in so much need. And I just had my mercy on him and I just let him go. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, well, guess what? He's lying to you and he's going to come back. So the following day, he basically came back and the same scenario happened, started eating with full gluttony and taking food and, more than what he can handle, but he was still taking it. And then and then Abu Huraira said, I'm going to complain to the Prophet ﷺ about you. And then he did the same scenario. You leave me, please. I'm in need. I have children. I promise I won't come back. And then Abu Huraira basically said, I felt sorry for him, let him go. And he just went. Then the following day, he went to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, "Oh, Prophet of Allah." Well, the Prophet ﷺ actually said, "Oh, what happened to your hostage?" He said, "Well, he complained that it was in such dire need. So I basically had just, had my mercy upon him and I just let him go." And the Prophet ﷺ said, "He's lying to you and he's going to come back." So he said, "Farasattuhu." He said, "I started watching him closely and watching to see if he would come back. And sure thing, he came back the third time and he did the same thing, eating with gluttony, taking more food than what he's supposed to. And then he basically grabbed him and said, 'I'm going to take you to the Prophet ﷺ and complain about you.' And he said, 'This is the third time and you had lied and you said you weren't going to come back. And here you are, you're coming back.' So the guy said, 'Let me teach you something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will benefit you from.' He said, 'What is it?' He said, 'If you ever go to your bed, read Ayatul Kursi, and until you read it to the end. And then Allah will protect you throughout, basically will protect you, and no shaitan is going to get near you until dawn.' He said, then I let him go. And then he wakes up morning, and then the Prophet ﷺ said, 'What happened to your hostage? What did you do with him?' And he said, 'Oh, you know what, Prophet of Allah? He actually claimed that he was going to benefit me, give me some words that I'll benefit from, and I let him go.' He said, 'What did he teach you?' He said, 'He told me that if I were to go and basically prepare myself to sleep, I should eat Ayatul Kursi, I should read Ayatul Kursi and read the whole thing. And then he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would protect me throughout the night and no shaitan would get near me until dawn.' And he said, وَكَانُوا أَحْرَصَ شَيْءٍ عَلَى الْخَيْرِ. And he said, and he said that, if they're also keen on doing what is right. So the Prophet ﷺ said, what he said was right, but he's actually a liar. In other words, at that moment, what he said was true, but he's actually a liar. He said, 'Do you know who you're talking to?' He said, 'No.' Who was I talking to? He said, 'That was actually the shaitan.' In other words, in a human form, shaitan. Okay, so from this hadith, you could see number one is that it was narrated in Bukhari. Yes, it was mu'allaq, meaning it's one of those hadith that are part of the 1,314 or 316 hadith that are basically having a missing link in the key of in the chain of narration, but it still is considered in Sahih al-Bukhari, and you could see An-Nasa'i narrated it, Ibn Khuzayna. So you got a couple scholars of hadith actually narrating it. But here's one thing: do scholars necessarily agree that shaitan, when he said that was shaitan, do the scholars necessarily agree that that means so the scholars then actually had differences of opinion. So just because he said ذاك shaitan, that is a shaitan, does that necessarily mean that that's a shaitan to mean, the jinn shaitan? Or is it possible, meaning that this person is an evil person and that we can also call a human being a shaitan if they are basically deviant? So that was the second explanation, that the scholars that said it is impossible for us to see a shaitan, they said we can call a human being a shaitan, but that doesn't make him part of the jinn. Okay, that was the argument. And the first scholars that basically said, well, here's our evidence that he said ذاك الشيطان. He said, well, he did see a shaitan. The Prophet ﷺ, did mention that he was a shaitan, and this shaitan basically had certain information that is considered ghaib. When he said ولا يقربك شيطان, how did he know that no shaitan will get near? This is ghaibi information that you would not be capable of getting unless we're talking about the world of the unseen. So that was a good argument for, let's say, group one scholars. Okay, so now we see this one, and certainly when we go back to the hadith right there in regards to al-qarin, all right? Oh, just give me a second. All right, salam alaikum. Sorry about that. All right, now same thing when you're looking about another hadith that let's say, so the Abi Tamima, okay, so here we go. He said he was behind the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ basically tripped. So the Prophet ﷺ was on a donkey, and then he basically tripped, and then he said, تعس الشيطان. In other words, it's kind of like saying, well, you know what? All the failure due to the shaitan. So, of course, who said تعس الشيطان? That was Abi Tamim. So the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تقل تعس الشيطان فإنك إن قلت تعس الشيطان تعاظم. The Prophet ﷺ basically said, don't say ta'is al-shaytan, because the second, or ta'is al-shaytan, actually means, it's kind of like you're cursing shaitan. He said, don't curse the shaitan, because then he will get carried away. So, وَقَالَ بِقُوَّتِي صَرَعْتُ. And he said, then shaitan will think that with his power, he managed to make you trip. So what should I say? He said, say Bismillah تصاغر حتى يصير مثل الذباب. Say Bismillah. Say Bismillah, and if you say Bismillah, he will basically become smaller and smaller till he becomes like a fly. Till he becomes like a fly. Okay, so that was one thing, is that Abi Tamima, he was not a prophet, and certainly you could see that the donkey tripped, and when the donkey tripped, certainly the one that made the donkey trip was shaitan, but the Prophet ﷺ directed him to not necessarily give the power to shaitan, and basically let the shaitan feel that he lost his power, and just say Bismillah. Okay, now when you look at all these different things, I mean, it's just to help us at least see, are we capable of seeing shayateen? Are we not capable? Of course, like I said yesterday, I don't have any scientific evidence that proves, and what I mean by scientific evidence, physics, chemistry, and biology, and all of that, because this is not related to this kind of science. This is part of ghaib. This is part of ghaib, and in order to understand ghaib, you would basically have to go through the information that was given to us through al-ghaib. Otherwise, you don't have any other way of understanding. So whether you're speaking about adhab al-qabr, there's no way that I can prove to you adhab al-qabr by using CCTV. Or even trying to somehow measure the position the person was in when we first buried them, and all of that. That is part of al-ghaib. So what many people might try to do in understanding jinn, shayateen, or qabr, or any of these things is many times using their understanding in physics and materialistic things. But that's not how we measure things. That's not how we measure things, because the resource to understand all of this is basically through the text, is basically through the text, is basically through the Quran and Sunnah, because that is coming from al-Wahy. Because everything else is going to be يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ. They're either looking at things through their own speculation, or they're following their own drives. And وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَّبِّهِمُ الْهُدَى. And the Prophet or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically sent through the Prophet guidance. So looking at that to understand, can the shayateen actually be seen whatsoever? Can they not be seen, etc.? We can only understand that through the text itself. But we can also say that the text itself may contain some ambiguity. And certainly there's something called a nushra. Let me explain this for a bit. Now, let's just say person X knows for a fact that they actually found some magic, I don't know, spells and magic, things, and basically containing magic that is supposed to harm them, get them ill, or whatever it is. Let's just assume. Okay. And this person is really getting sick based on what they had actually found in their backyard, basically buried there, and they managed to find the amulets that contained all that magic there. Is it permissible to do what is called a nushra? What is a nushra? Think of it as you're trying to unmagic that. So what does that mean? So that basically means you're trying to do magic to break the magic spell. Okay. Majority of the scholars actually said that that is engaging in haram tatbib. What is tatbib? Tatbib actually means haram type of cure. So there's halal cure and there's haram cure. Magic is not one of the halal methods. So to unmagic it, or to use magic to break the spell, is basically haram to use. So what can we use? The only scholar that said that it was permissible, if only we have scholars that, or sorry, not scholars, but magicians that probably had a history of engaging in that and they repented. Okay. And then they said, well, to break this spell, here's another magic spell to break that spell. And Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib was really the only one that said, if we know through why do I keep on saying scholars? Through magicians that repented, and they had basically endorsed that the way to break that magic spell is through another magic spell that basically cancels it out, and that they had a method that doesn't bring harm, but it basically cancels another magic spell out. The only one that said it was permissible was Sa'id ibn Musayyib. This is called an-nushra. An-nushra. But the majority of the scholars, they disagreed and considered that magic is magic, and magic can only be done if you reach out to the shayateen and if you basically engage with the jinn, and it is not permissible because the only way that jinn will serve you in order to do magic is basically coming in through shirk. So jinn will not just serve you all of a sudden, hocus pocus, and here it is, we're right there. What did you want? And I'm under your command because you rubbed on some kind of I don't know, a genie. No, it doesn't happen like that. Okay, it doesn't happen like that. In order to basically have the jinn submit to that person, they would have to undergo a series of kufr, a series of engaging with najasa, impurities. in a series of, consider it as satanic rituals in order to get the shaitan to accept to be under their command and basically serve them. So in that situation, it makes no sense to say, well, I'm going to get another magic in order to cancel out the first magic, because anyways, to do this magic, that actually means you're going to be serving shaitan, and shaitan is only to do evil things. So that would basically mean it's like an oxymoron to actually say, hey, I'm trying to cancel out the bad by you doing bad. It's like, it doesn't go like that, because anyways, shaitan is basically doing one thing, which is to cause harm. Okay, let's say right there. So that was, I'm sure some of you might have questions in regards to this topic. So I'll just try to go over some of the things. And here we talked about inna ash-shaytana yajri min ibni adam majra ad-dam. We talked about this hadith that the Prophet ﷺ had said that a shaitan goes through the veins of the son of Adam, the way that the blood basically streams in through the veins. And we also said this very important hadith, inna lil malaki لما وللشيطان لما، أي بالقلب. فأما لمة الملك فإيعاد بالخير وتصديق بالحق، وأما لمة الشيطان فإيعاد بالشر وتكذيب بالحق. And we said that the Prophet ﷺ basically indicated that the angels would give you a certain inspiration, a good inspiration to basically inspire you with doing what is good, and certainly inspire you to believe in truth. Yet the shaitan's inspiration goes differently, where it's trying to inspire you to do what is evil and deny the truth. And certainly, let's see, we talked about this story right here. Remember the story of the man that was eating gluttony and all of that. So we mentioned that story. So of course, at the end, إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا الشَّيَاطِينَ أَوْلِيَاءَ لِلَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. I want to look at this one. This is really important, because many times we might say, okay, how do I know if that person is good or not good? How do I know if this is the right thing to do or not the right thing to do? Okay, fair enough. So the Prophet ﷺ and the ayat are letting us know that الشيطان يأمر بالسوء والفحشاء. الشيطان basically orders for what is su', what is harm, and al-fahsha, what is transgression. So in other words, for you to know whether this is satanic, whether this is diabolical or not, you're basically going to look at it and you're going to study it through Quran and Sunnah, and that's to help you identify what is considered ethical or not ethical, what is considered something of principle and what is not of principle, what is considered serving justice and what is considered not serving justice, what is considered fair and what is not considered fair. You're going to look through the lens of Quran and Sunnah. Why? Because you as a human being, you're definitely going to be influenced with the world around you, with so many different factors basically affecting your description or your judgment on whether something is acceptable or not. So another way in figuring out whether this person is doing the right thing or not, well, what you're going to do is إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا الشَّيَاطِينَ أَوْلِيَاءَ لِلَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. You're going to see if somebody is engaging in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described as unethical or dhulm or injustice, or perhaps maybe inappropriate, illicit, etc. That's how you would know that that is a diabolical behavior, that's a shaitan motive, and that's how you basically would scrutinize that person to say, okay, well, should I be friends with that person or not? If that person is inviting you to do the wrong thing, well, that means this person is taking shaitan as their awliya. Stop right there. What is a wali, anyways? When you say they're taking shayateen as awliya, what is al-wali? Al-wali has several meanings. Wali can be to mean in authority. Wali can be the person that is giving decision making, and wali can be the supporter. All right? Think of the wali as when a woman wants to get married, she needs her wali, right? What is he supposed to be? Well, he's supposed to give her support. But giving her support doesn't mean he's supposed to be validating every single thing that she does. but he's supposed to be giving support to make the right decision. He goes number two, decision making. In number three, he's supposed to take the right, let's say, authority in after studying the circumstance, studying the situation, and then decide, yes, this is the right decision for you. This is what I would recommend, looking at the pros and the cons, and this is what we would think is the best the best decision making, or perhaps maybe the best direction for you. That's what a wali does. But when you look at إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا الشَّيَاطِينَ أَوْلِيَاءَ, that is to say what? That a shayateen do the same thing. They can, one, give you certain decision making. They can give you also certain support. Yes, shayateen will support their followers. They'll support their followers if they're doing what is haram. It's okay. I remember seeing videos during political science class in the U.S. and these gay people, and they were basically inflicted with HIV and AIDS, and they were saying that that was shaitan trying to harm them, but what they're doing is just right. Look at that, shaitan trying to harm them, but what they're doing is just right. This is what they were saying, supporting one another. And this is subhanallah, shaitan, basically getting them deluding them into swaying them away from who the real cause and what the real cause is, which is their behavior, which is their illicit behavior, their aberration in how they conducted sexual relations. But they didn't even recognize that. So they thought that it was shaitan that was trying to take them away from doing what is actually right, which is, of course, that sexual aberration. Anyhow, but when you look at إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا الشَّيَاطِينَ أَوْلِيَاءَ لِلَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically letting us know that decision making, support, and even authority will come from shayateen. And who are they supporting? الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. So let's flip the ayah a little bit, or flip the interpretation. So if same thing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is awliya, is the wali for the mu'mineen. Is the wali for the mu'mineen. So if we were to say shayateen are awliya alladhina la yu'minun, and therefore the inference is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the wali, as in numerous ayat basically said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically the wali for al-mu'mineen. All right, now when there's another interpretation, إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا الشَّيَاطِينَ أَوْلِيَاءَ لِلَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. The inference, some scholars, they actually went farther than saying decision making and support and authority and reference. Basically, when we say authority, we're talking about reference. Okay, we're talking about reference, or we're perhaps talking about what is considered as the center in their life. Okay, the other interpretation, some scholars actually went to the inference, and they said, well, what that is entailing, this is talking about that as a result of the choices that they would be making, this would be increasing in their punishment. And therefore, سوينا بينهم في الذهاب عن الحق. So, same thing. The inference is that shayateen, they were swayed away from truth, and the people that follow them would go in accordance to what the shayateen had basically guided them into, which is to sway away from truth. Let's continue with the ayah. إِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً قالوا وجدنا عليها آباءنا والله أمرنا بها قل إن الله لا يأمر بالفحشاء أتقولون على الله ما لا تعلمون. Stop right there for this ayah. Now, when you look at this ayah, let's look at it, and put it together into the Quran itself, and kind of connect it with some things. Let's see. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O sons of Adam, do not let the shaitan get you or expel you out of Jannah, as what he had done basically to your parents, Adam and Eve, and he had caused that their garments would basically be uplifted and expose their private private parts. For he is capable of seeing you and his tribe, well, he's capable of seeing you and his tribes are capable of seeing you as well, and yet you are not capable of seeing them. And for ishayateen are awliya or supporters or basically what we had said, the centers of for those that do not believe. Yet, I want to look at this way. And if they do a fahisha, if they do a fahisha, what is a fahisha? The Prophet ﷺ said, ليس المؤمن بالطعان ولا اللعان ولا الفاحش ولا البذيء. Let's do this one again. ليس المؤمن بالطعان ولا اللعان ليس المؤمن بالطعان ولا اللعان ولا الفاحش ولا البذيء. Let's look into this hadith really quick because this is very important for us to differentiate between the meanings. So ليس المؤمن, a believer is not ta'an. What is ta'an? A person that's continuously complaining about everything or speaking or exposing other people's faults or other people's shortcomings. That's a ta'an. A believer is a person that looks at the goods of things. A believer is like a bee, is always looking for the pollen in order to make honey. That's a believer. وَلَا اللَّعَانِ. And a believer is not a person that's continuously damning things. Everything is in this world to them is going the wrong direction. Why me? Why everything? Why? If their car stops, they're damning the car. If their son basically does the wrong thing, they would damn him. And the list goes on and on. And وَلَا الْفَاحِشْ وَلَا الْبَذِيء. I want you to look at this one. الفحش is to speak of things that are supposed to be covered. So whether we're speaking about sexual things or things that are relating to illicit behavior or speaking about anything of that, that's flesh. Whether a man speaking about his wife or a wife speaking about the husband, regardless of the halal relationship between them, that's to be behind doors, not exposed on social media. Even if you two are married, what you do in your bedroom is not to be exposed basically outside whatsoever, not to be talked about, not to be described, not to be shared, not to be, I don't know, put on Facebook and whatever it is in order to say, yeah, we're holding hands or whatever, and I don't know, taking photos of your feet together and all of that. That's absolute flesh. That is flesh. These things are private. They should not be exposed whatsoever. This is something that you basically do in private areas. Now, al-badha'a is different. Al-badha'a is to speak of things that are disgusting, things that are inappropriate. So like what? Like, for example, instead of saying you went to the bathroom, you're becoming graphic and you're giving me more details about what you had done. Why are you telling me all these details? That's supposed to be something that is also private. A mu'min is pure in their words, pure in their behavior. But here's one thing. So if that's what you say, then why was this ayah bringing up fahisha in the midst of telling us about shaitan and what he was doing and what his goal was in basically exposing their private parts? What does fahisha have to do with all of this? Fair enough. It was part of the culture of the people of Quraysh. In order to make a business out of religious practices, they would create certain policies that served them and only them. So, in order to sell out their garments for expensive prices and people to basically buy it, they would say you're not allowed to do tawaf. Remember, they would come to do tawaf around the Kaaba. For what? Well, for the idols that were there. But they wanted to do further business, so they would basically say, you cannot bring garments from home. You cannot bring anything from home, and it could only be acceptable if you're basically renting or you're buying from the people of Quraysh, and it has to be from a specific group. What are they doing? They're basically creating a new trade. They wanted to abuse people's belief system and basically make a business out of it. So some of them, they couldn't afford to rent out clothes from them or buy clothes from them. So they would end up basically doing tawaf around the Kaaba naked, literally naked, men and women. Okay, so that's that ayah and why it said وَإِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً قَالُوا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهَا آبَاءَنَا وَاللَّهُ أَمَرَنَا بِهَا. And if they were to do the wrong behavior, they would basically say, well, we had found our ancestors doing so. In other words, they considered it, hey, we've got a chain of narration, we've got something that traces back to our holy ancestors, and that's what they were doing. Then therefore you cannot come out and tell us that somehow this culture is deviant. That was their claim. So they basically said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, said, وَإِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called the behavior of uncovering the garment and going around the Kaaba naked as fahisha. Now, in the Quran, if the word as-su' wal-fahsha comes together as a compound word, then that is referring to zina. Or if you're talking about just fahisha, the word fahasha, it can mean to exceed the limit in aberration, to exceed the limit in deviant behavior. That's fahasha. The second meaning for fahisha is most of the times exclusive to sexual illicit behavior. To illicit behavior, meaning that it is actually related to sexual behavior, whether you're exposing your aura or whether you're engaging in any form of illicit behavior, that would basically be a fahisha. قالوا وجدنا عليها آباءنا والله أمرنا بها قل إن الله لا يأمر بالفحشاء. Now, two things that you're saying here, and say, this is the response, say, verily Allah Almighty does not order for illicit behavior. What is that supposed to entail? This is supposed to entail that in order for you to identify a certain behavior to be unethical or not, you need to scrutinize the actual behavior. If the behavior is basically an illicit behavior or a behavior that is ill-mannered, then that's how you would know that this cannot be divine instruction. This cannot be divine instruction or divine direction, and certainly will not lead to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yet, if this behavior is otherwise, well, that's where you would know, إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا الشَّيَاطِينَ أَوْلِيَاءَ لِلَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. You would look at it and you would know that if somebody is engaging in a shaitani behavior, then you would know that they had taken the shayateen as their center, the shayateen as their reference, the shayateen as their support, and the shayateen as the ones to basically sway them away from the right path. So this ayah actually has a reason, or at least a sabab nuzul, the reason of revelation. Now, not all ayat necessarily have a reason for revelation, but this happens to be one of those ayat. قُلْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَأْمُرُ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ. Say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not order for illicit behavior. In other words, this is impossible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would approve such a behavior, because the behavior in itself is basically coming in with illicit behavior. It is not whatsoever acceptable from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, this is very important that we understand one, referencing, two, scrutinizing the behavior and classifying it. Is it shaitani or is it divine? Is it shaitani or is it centered around what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically instructed us? This is extremely important. How to classify it, not based on liberal culture, and certainly not based on postmodernism, and not based on feminism, and not based on atheism, and not based on, the presentation of perhaps maybe the Department of Psychology or the Department of Sociology or whatever it is, because even those departments, they don't necessarily come from 100% science, but they basically come from certain ideologies that would basically interpret, and they would interpret the data based on those ideologies. And this is very important. And I had seen many times we would get students, and we would get even PhDs many times, because they did not read and study epistemology. They would think, okay, well, this is what this study is saying, when it's not what the study is saying. It's basically the interpretation that is not necessarily subjective, but is actually coming from a certain ideology. So that's why we basically need a Muslim lens that is reading the data, and a Muslim lens basically has a foundation of Islam. It's like, oh, we're going to read things differently. We've got our lens that is backed up by Quran and Sunnah, and this is our reading on what this data is probably saying. How do we understand human behavior? How do we understand human motive? How do we understand how we can use this data to make a reconciliation, to bring about, a better society, etc. Now we could see during our times, there's a trend, my friends. There's a trend. The trend is to vilify parents as one of those trends. To vilify parents. Islam did not actually consider whatsoever that that is acceptable, even if the parent was abusive, even if the parent was kafir, even if the parent, no matter what they did. Why? Because Islam is telling us that in order for you to be healthy, you need to redirect your vision to see whoever had contributed in good in your life, jazakallahu khairan. And whoever did not contribute good, and especially when it comes to parents, it's a very sensitive topic. A very sensitive topic. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن جَاهَدَاكَ عَلَى أَن تُشْرِكَ بِي مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٌ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. But wait a minute, they transgressed. My mom is pressuring me. My father is doing this to me. All of that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, listen, I know what you're going through. Now, what you need to do is that you need to get out of your comfort zone, and your duty is to basically live up to the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If they fail to live up to the principle, I want you to embrace the good contribution that they had given you. Your life, your health, your education, possibly, all the good things. I want you to embrace that. Not until you embrace it are you going to use it. You would only be capable of using it if you were capable of seeing it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was asking you to always read Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. But for what? Why did I start with Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen? Because it's redirecting your vision to tell you, listen, I want you to put on a positive lens, and I want you to see the good in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, the good in what your parents had given you, the good in what your family had given you, and the good in what you have. Not until then will you be happy. Not until then will you be positive. Not until then will you be successful in this dunya and in the hereafter. Okay, so now, أَتَقُولُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Will you claim things about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala which you basically do not know of? What does it mean that you basically do not know of? You do not know of, meaning you do not have a reference to. You don't have a reference to it. Where's the reference going to be? Well, if you're going to study different matters, you're either using speculation, probably experiments, and certainly we're talking about empirical studying and empirical knowledge and all of these different things that's based on experiment. Well, experiment is basically, as from its name, it's what you try to probably consider certain patterns of things, and then you make a final conclusion based on the patterns and based on what you had basically come out with in trial and trial and trial. That's what you basically do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that makes it a fact, because what you are doing in the research is still within the area of up till what you know now. That would be limited data. Now, the other second resource is يتبعون إلا الظن وما تهوى الأنفس. تهوى الأنفس is basically all the different things that perhaps would be as a drive, or perhaps a desire, or perhaps something that you got used to and it becomes you wanting to fit in, or you wanting to get accepted by others, and the list goes on, and that's تهوى الأنفس. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَبِّهِمُ الْهُدَى. And that's to help us know that the reference that you identify truth from falsehood is basically going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is al-huda, which is guidance. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أَتَقُولُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, do you say of what you have no knowledge about, no reference about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How are you going to understand what ethics are? There's no way that you're going to be able to understand ethics unless you plagiarize either from religion, or you basically use perhaps maybe a universal imperative, or probably, different methods of trying to figure out maybe ethics, whether it's called trying to go through religions, or whether that's called looking at the consequence, or looking at the morals and morals themselves. Are, is it a good behavior? Is it not acceptable? And what is the implication? Or perhaps looking at the trajectory of this behavior. That's how different philosophers understood whether something is ethical or not. But even that is not enough, because it can go wrong. You'll have John Locke, you'll have David Hume, basically, or even Kant, and even each and every single one has his take on what method we can use in order to understand akhlaq, to understand what is considered a fahisha or not, because they fail to see it as a fahisha. They fail to see it as an aberration. They fail to see it as an illicit behavior. And that's the same thing today. You may take, some women might say, well, polygamy is evil and it's harming women, and etc. Well, wait a minute. What lens are you using? Whose lens are you using? Are you using the lens from the first wife, or the lens from the second wife, or the lens from women, or the lens from how many women, or the lens from men? Whose lens are you using? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know that the definition to considering something acceptable or not acceptable, not just, and how you understand it, goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أَتَقُولُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. This is not only speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but this is to say that akhlaq, mannerisms, akhlaq, morals, values, they are not to be separated from how we embrace and what we regard as truth or falsehood. They're not to be separated, but they're actually part of it. They are part of it. In other words, when we speak about the definition of women's rights, the definition of children's rights, the definition of parents' rights, the definitions of all animal rights and what it is, that's going to be based on the definition that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had either approved or did not approve. Then therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the reference. So when you say أَتَقُولُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, that's to let us know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the reference. Okay, so let's go back to Al-Qurtubi right there, and he basically said majority of the mufassirin. What is a mufassir? A mufassir is basically the scholar of exegesis of Quran. It's basically the scholar that learned and basically had the qualification and is competent to explain the Quran, to go into the Quran. That's a mufassir. Okay, I'm just ناقل التفسير. I'm not a mufassir. Okay, I'm just ناقل التفسير. I just basically let you know what is in those books. I'm not a mufassir, but I basically just, help you see what is in those books because I know how it feels as somebody that at one point did not speak fluent Arabic, so I was always keen on knowing what is in these ayat and what is in these words and what is in the books of tafsir. I know how it feels, so I thought maybe, you know what, I can use my English language and my and my expertise in Islamic studies, and I could help people see what's in these books. Treasures. That's why we call the gems of light. Okay, so majority of the Mufassirin, they basically said this is basically relating to when they were doing that tawaf and circumambulating around the Kaaba naked. Well, let's see right there. And other scholars, they basically said, well, al-fahisha here, let's actually highlight it for you, that al-fahisha here is not relating necessarily to the behavior, and that's what al-Hasan had, al-Hasan ibn Ali, he basically said this is relating to shirk and kufr. What is shirk? Shirk is basically associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it can go in different ways. There can be shirk in aqidah, believing that something else is basically having the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or sharing the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one form of shirk. The second form of shirk is basically in worshiping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, that's a second form of shirk. So shirk can be in what you believe in, and shirk can be in what you worship. Both can be considered shirk. Shirk in what the person believes in could basically also be in associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning the person believes that someone else is sharing a certain position with the divine, or can believe that certain names and attributes can also be given, and certain powers can also be given or shared by someone else or something else, to believe that perhaps maybe the amulets, or believe that they're things, I don't know, the clover leaf or whatever it is that basically gives you good luck, that's shirk. Or to believe anything that might keep even harm from you. I don't know, that blue eye, whatever thing, that it keeps away harm from you. That's basically shirk. If you were to believe that anything has the power to bring good or has the power to remove evil, that's shirk. Okay, and certainly the evidence that they had used that this was somehow this was acceptable. They said, وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهَا آبَاءَنَا وَاللَّهُ أَمَرَنَا بِهَا. They had two claims. They said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered us to do it. Number one, they said, وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهَا آبَاءَنَا. We had found our ancestors, we had seen our ancestors basically adopt such a culture, and we're basically doing the same thing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will expose that just because you see a trend, just because you see a group of people behaving in such a way, does not mean you engage in the same behavior. So what is a leader? A Muslim must be a leader by taking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as their center, by taking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as their center and the Prophet ﷺ as their teacher. So what do? They basically scrutinize every single behavior. And that's why Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he said, اغدو عالما أو متعلما ولا تكن الثالثة فتهلك, or ولا تكن إمها فتهلك. What does that mean? You either seek ilm and become a scholar, or you become a student of ilm, or do not be the third and end up in deviation or end up in corruption. You're either a student of ilm or you're a scholar. The third option is not whatsoever, even in any shape or form, an option to take, which is just to follow what everybody else is doing. You basically have one option, which is to either be a scholar, or two options, either to be a scholar or to be a student of ilm. Okay, now, having that being said, when they said, well, قالوا وجدنا عليها آباءنا, that was basically to expose them that you should not whatsoever think that you're just going to embrace a certain culture or a certain behavior and claiming that, well, everybody else is doing it, therefore I should be safe. This is very common, that people think that if everybody else is doing it, look, why didn't anybody expose it? And that's one thing. Just because a certain practice is practiced by everyone else, that doesn't necessarily make democracy, or that doesn't make a certain trend necessarily acceptable just because everyone else is doing it. ولا تكن الثالثة فتح له. All right, now let's see. والله أمرنا الله أمرنا بها قالوا لو كره الله ما نحن عليه لنقلنا عنه. That if when they said والله أمرنا بها, their inference is, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not want us to behave in that way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have intervened and somehow told us that that's not right. Well, it's already happening. You are basically directed to stay away from this behavior, but are you actually staying away from this behavior, or what is happening? And that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposed them and said, when they had said, Wallahu amarana biha, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered them to do it, and He basically said, قُلْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَأْمُرُ بالفحشاء. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not order بالفحشاء. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not order for what is evil, and therefore this is not whatsoever a valid claim, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically hold them accountable for the blasphemy that they are committing, and that they're basically be held accountable for the behavior itself. So two things: for the lie and for the behavior. That's what they will be. That's what they will be held accountable for. All right. قُلْ أَمَرَ رَبِّي بِالْقِسْطِ. What is the alternative? And say, my Lord Almighty, or my Lord Almighty orders بالقسط. What is al-qist? Qist is justice. Qist is justice. All right. All right. Sorry about that. قُلْ أَمَرَ رَبِّي بِالْقِسْطِ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is the response. Now, when you look at قُلْ أَمَرَ رَبِّي بِالْقِسْطِ, that's to let us know that it's not enough to cancel out and refute an argument. You got to bring an alternative. And when you want to get into a debate, you have to do two things. One, prove their argument wrong, and look into the discrepancies in what they are saying by looking at, one, the resource, two, the objective, and three, basically the words themselves and where the trajectory of this behavior and what it will lead to. There's number one. That's when you want to refute an argument. You want to look at the resource, you're going to look at the trajectory, you're going to look at basically the words themselves and the discrepancies within them. And the other method that you have to come in, it's not enough to cancel it out, but you also have to bring the alternative. Remember, La ilaha illallah. It's not enough to say there's no God worthy of worship, but you have to bring in the alternative. Illallah, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's tahliyah and there's tahliyah. There's canceling out and there's basically introducing the alternative. You can't just cancel it out. What other argument do you have? That's one thing that you would see atheists fail in. Atheists, they would cancel out everything and basically say, oh, that's canceled out. There's no God. There's no this, no that, no that. And then they would cancel things out. But do they actually have an alternative to the definition of ethics? Who is God? What is the foundation of this world? Where did it begin? Well, they're considered, well, it began with some molecules, hydrogen, helium, and whatever it is, basically connecting with each other. And kaboom, there you go. You have it right there. But wait a minute, 0 plus 0 does not equal 1. How did you get there? What actually brought the helium? What brought the hydrogen? What brought all of this? It doesn't actually come to bring something, and that takes us into, well, you said it started from that point, and then a Muslim would basically say, well, wait a minute, there is a point that even started before the existence of these elements themselves. All right, now, قُلْ أَمَرَ رَبِّي بِالْقِسْطِ. Now you stand up with confidence and say, well, let me respond to it. Amara Rabbi Bilqist, my Lord Almighty. If you don't want to believe it, well, I'll give you the alternative. My Lord Almighty ordered for one thing, which is al-qist. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered for al-qist, justice, for what is considered as a level of stability, a level of balance, a level of qist, where there's no question that this is to serve one, a trajectory that leaves everything at peace and balance. Two, that it basically has the resource that it's basically coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Three, the reference is, or the reference is not me making the claim, but it's basically coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, it is not coming in from dhann, it's not coming in from speculation, and certainly not because somehow it's going to serve certain things that are probably coming in support of my ego, but this is Rabbi. This is my Lord Almighty, Bilqist. I would turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's ordering Bilqist. He's ordering for justice. وَأَقِيمُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ. Stop right there. أَقِيمُوا. What is أَقِيمُوا? أَقِيمُوا actually means that you would, one, it comes from the root qama, which means to stand. The second word, أَقِيمُوا, actually means to back up or to support. أقيموا وجوهكم عند كل مسجد. أقيموا وجوهكم, and put your faces in front of عند كل مسجد, near every masjid. What does that mean? Stop right there for a bit. This actually takes me really quick to Surah An-Nur. When we gotta go to Surah An-Nur for a bit. Let me explain this one really quick, and hopefully we'll have time. أقيموا وجوهكم. You want to stand, support, get fixated. All of that is from the root qama. Qama actually means to stand. Qama also means to support. Aqama ala shay means to support. And qama could also mean to stay, well, we said stay in support and to face something. And when it said wujuhakum, yeah, certainly it's talking about faces, but is this necessarily a face as my face and your face, meaning just the face? Well, the face in Lugha Arabiya, sometimes we could use a word, one word like al-wajh, like face, but the inference is it's called badal, meaning, yes, I said face, but I don't necessarily literally mean just face, but I'm talking about the most important areas of your identity. That's your face. That's going to identify your place of seeing, your place of hearing, your place of tasting and talking and all of that, your place of speech, all of that. That is what identifies you. And that's why even your passport, it doesn't take a photo of your toes. It's taking a photo of your face. Because that is going to tell me a lot about who you are, what you are, and certainly even when the ayat are telling us, when the ayat is telling us وَأَقِيمُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ, is to tell us where is your face directed. Where's your face directed at? What are you looking at? Where is your face continuously heading to? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, عِنْدَ كُلِّ masjid. Be near the masajid. And the kulli masjid. You want to move to a new country, look at the nearest masjid. Where's the nearest masjid? Where are the kids going to go to? Where are you going to set up as considered as your pillars of where you're heading? عند كل masjid. Let the masjid be that pillar that you would consider your space as what you would turn to, your place of hangout, your place of dhikr, your place of relations, your place of ibadah, your place of learning ilm. That's your place of light. وَادْعُوهُ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ, and make the dua with complete sincerity. لَهُ الدِّينَ. When you want to practice deen, what is deen? A deen can be one, what you believe in. A deen, two, what you worship. Worship is a comprehensive word to mean in all different angles in life, whether we're speaking about ritual or whether we're speaking about what choices you make as a principle. Ritual and principle. And that's why Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam in Surah Yusuf, he basically had even mentioned that الدين اذكرني عند ربك, and then he also mentioned الدين right there, that في دين الملك. What is دين الملك? The way that basically the law works out. في دين الملك. The law, what's, in other words, what you would regard as acceptable, legal, not legal, all of that, that's deen al-malik. So therefore, ritual is not separated from principle. You cannot think that, oh, ritual is only in the masjid or only to be in a designated area, and therefore your thoughts and your beliefs about human rights and women's rights and husband and wife and what you should wear and all of that, that shouldn't be outside of the masjid. Well, wait a minute. Here, the ayah basically says, وَادْعُوهُ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ, and the word ad-deen is everything that you adopt. Everything that you adopt in ideology, in vision, in principle, in understanding the world and how these things are connected together, that's deen. That's deen. It's what you consider yourself as embracing, as being committed to something. All right? كَمَا بَدَأَكُمْ تَعُودُونَ. The way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had started you out, created you, you will return to Him as well. Why did I want to take you to Surah An-Nur? Let's remember this page, 162. I won't take long, but we need to definitely go to Surah An-Nur, and let's see, hopefully we can do it really quick without getting lost, okay? And I wanted to mention in regards to Surah An-Nur, here we go. Let's see, right there, this one, right there. Look at that. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had talked about Allahu nuru samawati wal ard, look at this ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the light of the heavens and the light of the earth. And as an example of his light is like the niche that basically would have inside, well, it is inside a glass or like a flask, and this flask is as if it is a kawkabun dirri or durri, two different qira'at, as if it is like a glowing, like a glowing star. And then this glowing star, it would be taking its light from a blessed tree, an olive blessed tree that's not from the east and not from the west. In other words, it would never turn off. Its own oil would light even if no fire had touched it. And it would be light upon light. And the one to guide to his light is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give us the examples, and Allah example to the people for them to see the patterns, to see the comparison. And your Lord Almighty is all knowing of everything. Where do we find these people? في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع ويذكر فيها اسمه. Where do we find these people that would basically have their hearts filled with this light? Where do we find these people? Where do we find this light? Where do we find this light that doesn't even need fire to light because it is basically glowing on its own? Where do we find them in? We find them في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع ويذكر فيها اسمه. You would find them in those homes, in those houses, in those facilities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had willed and had decreed that His name would sound loud and high and would basically be reflecting, glorifying the Lord Almighty throughout the night and throughout the day. Where and what would you find in these places? رجال لا تلهيهم تجارة ولا بيع عن ذكر الله. There would be men, no trade and no business would pacify them away from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وإقام الصلاة, and to basically having their focus on salah. They're not just doing some kind of emotion that is meaningless, but they're actually doing a salah that is full of focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and full of recognition of who they're praying to, وَإِيتَاءِ الزَّكَاةِ. And they would be willing and wholeheartedly basically giving. Where did we get the wholeheartedly? From the word ita. Ita means to give without needing or without looking for something in return. That's al-ita. You're not waiting for anything in return, but they would give wholeheartedly with nothing in return. Why would that happen to them? Why and how can they live that commitment? يَخَافُونَ يَوْمًا تَتَقَلَّبُ فِيهِ الْقُلُوبُ وَالْأَبْصَارِ. Their hearts would basically be in trembling basically in fear of the day on Judgment Day, when the hearts and the ears would basically be flipping in fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on that day. لِيَجْزِيَهُمُ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنَ مَا عَمِلُوا وَيَزِيدَهُم مِّن فَضْلِهِ. And the Lord Almighty will reward them better than what they had presented, and the Lord Almighty would increase from His giving. And وَاللَّهُ يَرْزُقُ مَن يَشَاءُ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. And the Lord Almighty will give without hisab, without accountability, and those are higher levels of Jannah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us and grant you the level of Jannah where He would basically يجزيهم الله أحسن ما عملوا ويزيدهم من فضله, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us and you, Ya Rabbi, that reward on Judgment Day بغير حساب. So inshallah, hopefully tomorrow, I don't know, I may need to cancel class. I may be flying to the US tonight, so I don't know. So for the time being, we'll just basically leave it at that, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, give a great cure for my sister, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, she was diagnosed with liver cancer, and definitely, very good girl, very good, inshallah نحسبها على خير, حافظة للقرآن, has a master's degree, and was actually the first, and in fact, she was a valedictorian in her class during high school and even in college, and mashallah has a master's degree in Tafseer and has several ijazat from even Dr. Walid al-Manisi. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, give her cure. Please make dua for her. She has a 7-month baby and a 4-year-old child, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, give her cure and keep her in your dua and keep me in your dua as well, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not have you see shar whatsoever or evil whatsoever. ربي يحفظكم جميعا. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. Go ahead, my friends. Ameen ya Rabbi, Rabbi يحفظكم جميعا. So let me, if there's anybody that would like to raise their hands and or even unmute themselves and go ahead and ask any questions, I'd be happy to listen to it.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Go ahead, Sister Teresa.
Just no questions or anything. Just I pray that your sister gets better, inshallah.
Ameen ya Rabbi. Allah يحفظك ya Rabbi. Ameen, 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 ameen.
My prayers are with you and your family and your sister. That's really sad. How does she deal? How does she cope with it? Like, how's she doing?
So She's, mashallah, since she was a child, there are 13 years between me and her. Since she was a child, she was always, you could see, light really covering this girl, since she was a child.
Mashallah.
She even memorized the Quran, and we didn't even know she was memorizing the Quran. And all of a sudden, she's like, "Hey, I finished memorizing the Quran." And we looked at her like, what are you talking about? Seriously? She was always a person, mashallah, of religious commitment, very spiritual, and very connected with Al-Aqsa, Masjid Al-Aqsa in particular, very connected to her Quran, very connected to her deen. So, inshallah, Rabbil Alameen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Wallahu khayrun hafidan wa huwa arhamur rahimin. Inshallah, she will be, in the preservation and from the hifdullah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's nothing impossible on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She underwent several surgeries, brain surgeries, and
Oh,
several other complications. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, give her shifa.
Amin.
Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. And please, please make dua for her. She's, mashallah, ya nahsabuha ala khair, a very good role model for many women, and just a person that was, that those Ibadullah Salihin that are in the cognito, I would imagine that she's one of them. And, I even had, I mentioned earlier that I one time had a dream, and I was in the midst of these very tall men, bearded tall men dressed in white. And I said, "Where's my sister Maryam? Where is she? Where is she?" And I started yelling out, "How dare she goes without me giving her the permission to do so?" And then I was just, angry. And then one of them said, في مقعد صدق عند مليك مقتدر, that she is next to the throne of the Lord Almighty.
Oh, subhanallah.
And that's the description of, the very high level of the Salihin, not any kind of Salih. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, make this a ru'ya sadiqa in regards to her. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make her, Ya Rabbi, amongst those that will be في مقعد صدق عند مليك مقتدر. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, give her the best of the healing. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi,
Amin.
give her شفاء لا يغادر سقما.
Amin.
And we would make the dua, Allahumma رب الناس أذهب البأس واشفها أنت الشافي لا شفاء إلا شفاءك اشفها شفاء لا يغادر سقما. اللهم آمين.
آمين آمين إن شاء الله إن
اللهم آمين.
شاء الله. يعني الله ينزل إعجازه في البر المباشر قبل أن تصل إليها إن شاء الله.
آمين يا ربي،
هو
آمين
قادر على
آمين
ذلك.
آمين
هو
آمين
قادر. الله يقويك الله يقويك. ما شاء الله حولك.
آمين يا ربي.
يا رب ياخذ
All
يا
right,
ريت
so
جنب والله يا ريت نقرب منك لك أنت كنت معك خطوة بخطوة إن شاء الله. يعني
Allah
المؤمن يشد
يحفظك يا
أزره
رب.
بأخيه بهذه
It,
الأوقات.
دعاء الصالحين is one thing that ينتبرك به. That's a barakah to actually get that دعاء الصالحين. And نحسبكن على خير. And everyone that's listening, نتوسم فيكم. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, give us the
اللهم
best of the
اجعلنا منهم.
inspirations, give us حسن الخاتمة, and give us that determination to stay on those grounds, because she was one of those في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع ويذكر فيها اسمه. She was always one of those that was always committed to the message, always committed and connected to the Quran, and always connected to طلب العلم. And yes, she was, rather, introverted, but that was because she was always connected to the Quran. Those figures that you may not notice them in public, but they would be the ones that are basically in a light, secluded away from everyone else.
ما شاء
Not
الله.
necessarily in public. You may not notice her, but she was those figures that were, right there. I would say anointed and chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. نحسبها على الخير والله حسيبها. Chosen to be in those chosen areas of light in the masjid, or probably in a corner away from people. And subhanallah, everybody that had ever dealt with her always fell in love with her. A very, very, very sweet-hearted girl. Very sweet-hearted girl. And Allah Rabbi يحفظها. اللهم
ربي
آمين.
يهنيها بهذه يعني البادجت الجريت بادجت she has it with the connection of Allah سبحانه وتعالى.
آمين
الله
يا ربي
الله
آمين.
لا ما بيسيبها الله إن شاء الله. ما
إن شاء
بيسيبها
الله يا
الله
ربي.
بهذا
إن شاء
المجال.
الله ربي يحفظكم جميعا. إن شاء الله. So we will inshallah. See you tomorrow, hopefully, and we will inshallah continue.